Well, good morning, everybody, and welcome to this Faraday Institute Church Leaders Workshop. It's a pleasure to welcome you all, and numbers on the screens are increasing. It's always a pleasure when I have to flick to a second screen on Zoom in order to be able to see everybody. We're looking forward to what's going to be going on over the next 2 days. We have a range of different speakers who are going to be talking to us of subjects everything from creation to artificial intelligence to ethics to creation care. And we kick off this morning with Ruth Bancewicz. Ruth is our church engagement director. She's been working for the Faraday Institute almost since its inception in 2006. She originally did a PhD in cell biology and worked as a postdoctoral worker before becoming working for Christians in Science as their development officer, and then moved to the Faraday Institute in 2006. Ruth probably needs very little introduction. She's well known for many of the things that she's written, instrumental in the test of faith resources. God in the Lab is another one of her publications. A number of other things that Ruth has done that would take up too much time for me to explain them all to you, but look at some of the resources that Ruth has on the website. And Ruth is going to start our proceedings by talking about engaging the church with science and faith. Ruth, over to you. It's a pleasure to welcome you this morning.
Thank you, Keith. That's great. I hope you can all hear me all right. And I'm just going to share my slides. As the instructions to speakers said, please make sure you don't share your emails or something more personal. Now, you may turn off your video if you wish, but I do enjoy seeing people's happy faces while I'm speaking. So do feel free to leave your camera on if you wish, and I can. No, I can't. I'll have to do that another time. I am not sophisticated up in my screen sharing, but I did discover that there's a whiteboard in screen sharing. That just shows how behind I am with Zoom. And talking to a colleague yesterday, so I won't inflict that on you today. I won't experiment on my guests, but it's good to see. What I'm going to do is I am going to talk in 3 chunks. The longest chunk, 20 minutes, will be the first. And then after that, in between those, we'll have some times for discussion, sometimes just Q&A or discussion as a whole group. You can unmute yourself, or sometimes as we'll put you into breakout rooms. We'll put you into the same breakout rooms for this session, so you'll come back several times to the same group, and then in future sessions you'll be randomly sorted into different breakout rooms, so you should get to know different people. So I'm going to, does anyone know why I can't? Oh yes, I can change my slides. Keith has already mentioned the coffee slots. I won't say anything about that, but I will give you a little outline. So I'm going to talk, first of all, I'll call it Worshipping God with Science, but it's really a bit of background information to science and faith. I'll introduce you to my theology of science, and I'll give you some stories of scientists who are Christians. In the next chunk of the talk, I will talk about how churches can engage with science. And in the last part of the talk, I will, towards 11 o'clock, towards 10:30, I will share some stories of what churches have been doing to inspire you. And I should say that PDFs of the slides for all the talks will be provided later, so you don't have to scribble notes. So, thinking about worshipping God with science, and these beautiful pictures that I'm using, well, I think they're beautiful, but I'm a scientist. I hope you do think they're beautiful. They're in a book that is being published that I've written, and that's a very good illustrator has illustrated, that will be coming out this summer. So you get a sneaky preview of those images which have been donated by scientists all over the world. So, thinking about science and faith on this course, I know some of you will have a science background, some of you won't, but I think it's good just to think about a little bit about what science is. Science is all about gathering evidence. If you can weigh it or measure it or observe it in some way, it's likely to be something you can do science on. Science is about coming up with general principles about the way things in the world behave, or describing them with maths. Science is creative. It's imaginative. You have to be able to think up solutions to things or come up with ideas and then test them. It involves intuition, a sort of leap that your mind will make, but then you can track back and think, why did my mind make that leap? And think about the things that you know, the knowledge that you have, and the things that you've experienced, and the intuitive leap will make sense. Science is always provisional. If it's not provisional, if it can't be disproved, the thing you are studying, you are not studying it scientifically. Science involves lots of mechanisms to reduce bias, because we're very good at fooling ourselves. It's very collaborative. We review each other's work. Well, I left science a long time ago, but I remember the review process. Probably the most terrifying part for me, to be honest, was presenting my work to my own colleagues in the lab, because they would make mincemeat of anything that didn't make sense, and that's very good. They mostly did it kindly, but if you could get past that filter, you've probably done something worthwhile. Hopefully, overall, science is getting nearer to the truth in its exploration of the world. That's the aim. So, for example, if you look at a coral reef, you can look at the colors of things. You can look at the different species that are there. Are they different species? Or are they just different kinds of the same species? What is a species, after all? You can look at the different nutrients that we all draw on and the way that they're recycled, and all sorts of questions like that. Whether it's beautiful or what we should do with it, given that we have the power to do things to the rest of creation, those are not scientific questions. That doesn't mean they're not important, but they're not science. So in thinking about a theology of science, you have to spend quite a lot of time looking at assumptions. The idea that everything is God's. If you're a Christian, and I want to get rid of that natural, supernatural distinction, which is more based on different kinds of philosophy than on the Bible. Everything belongs to God. God is rational. We are made in his image, so we would expect to reflect some of his rationality and be able to understand the world. And then we can talk about the ways that science complements theology. One way of describing this is to think about the revealed knowledge of God, that would be through scripture and through his relationship with people and the rest of his creation, and knowledge about his purposes in the world, and then the different kind of knowledge that science gives us about creation. They're both good kinds of knowledge. Or another way of talking about this complementary relationship is to think of God as the primary cause of everything. If he disappeared, we would disappear. His ongoing creative actions in the world. And scientists are studying secondary causes, gravity, growth of plants, sunshine, all sorts of things that drive things forward in the world. We study those mechanisms and those secondary causes. Or perhaps the simplest way to think about it is in terms of meaning and mechanism. I don't know if someone has their microphone on. It might be mine that's producing feedback, but if you can all have a little check that are muted, that would be good. So meaning and mechanism, when we're looking at that coral reef, then, those things I was talking about were mechanism things, about species and nutrients and what have you. And then the questions about its value and things we should do, what we should do with it, what we ought to do with it, are about meaning, and that's the realm of theology. So this is a picture. Some of us you may have come across this illustration of the kettle. Why is the kettle boiling? Well, we could come up with a physics explanation of that. You know, a GCSE science student could write an essay about it, about the movement of water molecules. Or you can say, well, I'm British, or most countries of the world, people have tea or their equivalent, drink or way of hosting people, and you may not be thirsty. In fact, you may not like tea, but you'll probably say yes to a cup of tea and sit down and have a chat with someone, because there's a great meaning to that. You don't have to choose between having mechanism tea or meaning tea. Those two things are just different ways of looking at the same event. The other assumption that comes from Christian theology when we're doing science is that we want to do science, or we want to use scientific knowledge, as we all do, in good ways, that it's worth doing that. So, for example, we have your mobile phone, which most people have now, a smartphone, or other kinds of technology. You can use it for good, you can use it for staying in touch, you can use it with all the wonderful tools you can have on it, or you can use it to be rude to people, to ignore someone you're with and talk to someone else, or to, you know, children could bully each other at school. And we believe that as Christians, or most individuals in the world, will believe that we should use technology in good ways. The other topic that comes up quite a lot when we're thinking about science and faith is the question of prayer and miracles, and especially at times like this where so many people are struggling. And there's often a secondary cause or a mechanism behind the answer to prayer or the miracle. People have different definitions of miracles, so I won't try and pin it down too tightly at the moment, but the Red Sea crossing was an obvious one mentioned in the Bible, and the Bible talks about the wind blowing all night, and then the Israelites walked across on dry land. May have been a bit muddy. Sometimes, you know, for example, with the case of the resurrection, the most important miracle in history, everyone knows that people who are dead, and you don't need to be a doctor to understand what that is, don't come back to life unless God intervenes, thankfully. Both types of thing are actions of God. Some people would only count the second kind, the resurrection kind, as a miracle. Other people would count these miracles of timing as miracles. But they're both actions of God. They both further his causes in the world. They both reveal things about his character and his relationship with us. So I mention this because often miracles are used as this is something that defies science and that is evidence for God. And I think that encourages people to find the scientific mechanism behind the miracle and then say, well, God didn't do it. But I think there we've made an error in the definition of what a miracle is. God does everything. If he does something unexpected, it's because he's chosen to do it. Opens up several fun cans of worms, which we don't have time to think about just now. So we finally come to a theology of science, that we study creation scientifically, primarily because God values it. It's very good. You know, all sorts of biblical passages right throughout the Bible about being fruitful. It praises God. He could have created any way he liked. Nothing was constraining him. So if we want to find out about it, we have to explore it. We can't sit and philosophize in a chair and expect to learn anything about the reality of the world. Solomon liked exploring the world. Psalm 111 has a lovely verse about, creation being studied by everyone who looks into it. We also study creation scientifically because it's useful. Biblically, look at the wisdom literature, tells you that we can learn wisdom from creation. Scientific knowledge is useful to us because it helps us in our task of tending and keeping creation, which Dave Bookless will be speaking to us about later on. It helps us to help people And I think Keith will be talking later on about some of the ethics of that. And like any task we do, it can be a crucible for character formation and a way of an arena within which we can demonstrate Christ-like behavior. And finally, but probably most importantly, because this is the purpose of all creation, including ourselves, scientific knowledge can fuel our worship. And I hope that some of the pictures I share today of scientific things are beautiful to you as well as me. And I'll be using some of them in our time of worship at the end of tomorrow. So there is a set of human chromosomes from a man, and I think they're quite beautiful. They look a little bit like stripy socks. This is, if you slightly unfamiliar with the jargon, this is DNA. So it's divided up into chunks that we call chromosomes. And when those are raveled up tightly enough, then they turn into these little, look a little bit like stripy socks, thanks to our youth and schools team, one of our youth and schools team's co-director, for making an actual stripy sock version. That was in the beginning of the first lockdown when we needed some morale boosting. Now, alongside a theology of science, I think it's helpful to have a theology of nature. I normally don't use the word nature, but theology of creation would make you think I'm about to teach you the doctrine of creation, which you already know. Hopefully you already know, have thought about a theology of nature too, but it's less, probably less often taught. And I, going from the theologian Alistair McGrath in Oxford, like the idea of using theology as a lens to look at the world. So when we look at the world, we can see that science is consistent with theology. For example, it makes sense of the order we see in the world. Genesis 1 talks all about God ordering the world when he creates. It makes sense of the beauty we see in the world. God is beautiful, his creation should be beautiful. It seems to have had a beginning. And, you know, we believe that God is the one who brought the universe out of nothing. It's very fruitful. We see things increasing in complexity. All of these things make sense of a purposeful God who creates for a reason. They're not evidence, proof for God. They might be some kind of evidence in a gentle way, although they don't tell you that there is a God, but they're consistent with it. You can interpret the data in a number of ways. One of the ways, and I think the most convincing way, is that there is a God. So, for example, when I hung out in this little patch of temperate rainforest on the west coast of Scotland, it was a lovely patchwork of trees and little bits of open grass, but it had been largely undisturbed for the last few hundred years and was incredibly rich in species. I could hear the insects buzzing. It was the summer, and I could sit there and I could join in with the worship of all creation, worshiping God alongside his creation. And, you know, I could enjoy the beauty. And I think for most of us, being in a place like that helps us to worship God, helps us to see something of the character of the Creator. Very general things, not anything too specific, but to experience something of God in his creation. And Dennis Alexander will be talking a little bit about this later on today. Keith mentioned my book, God in the Lab, and that for me was a very fun exploration of how science enhances faith. I looked at topics that are close to scientists' heart. I've mentioned beauty and creativity already, sense of wonder that is often part of what drives a scientist forward. We never stop asking why. The imagination that I've mentioned, and the sense of awe that I think everyone feels from time to time. It's like a rare reward for all the hard work and the slog in the lab. Occasionally you'll reach a mountaintop, as it were, in your discoveries and see something new that makes you feel a sense of awe. What you do with that sense of awe will depend on your worldview. For a Christian, it often leads them to worship God. So theology of nature brings up the question, what about suffering? And this is something that we're experiencing. I don't need to tell you that because I'm sure you're all dealing with it pastorally. We know that creation is spoiled by sin, largely by human impact, and we can see that playing out in the world at the moment. And Bob will be talking a little bit more about that. But there is still something intrinsically good about creation. It is spoiled by sin, but we can see that goodness. We need to be, because of that, very discerning if we're tempted to do, if we want to do natural theology, which was what Dennis Alexander is going to talk about, learning about God from creation rather than just seeing a resonance. We need to be very careful there. Thankfully, we know that Jesus died to redeem all of creation. This is the answer for me to the question of suffering. And that anything good and beautiful that we do see in creation, and one could add in human actions, points to the new heavens and the new earth and the hope that we have there. But I mean, I've skipped over that very quickly, and Bob White will go into that in more detail, and hopefully we've all got resources on that. But there's a series of essays on the Faraday Church's page as well. So just to summarize where I've been, Christian faith is a framework for doing science well. We can have a good theology of science that promotes the activity of doing science. Science is a great way to enjoy from, benefit from, and serve creation. And science can enhance our faith in different ways. So I have a theology of nature. But science does have limits, looking at that mechanism and meaning idea, thinking again of that picture of the coral reef. It doesn't tell us what we ought to do. That's where we do need philosophy, or I would believe as a Christian, a theology to help us to do that. So before we stop for a bit of discussion, just some quick stories about scientists of faith. We know that people always investigate the world. You just have to watch toddlers doing it, asking questions, trying things, poking things. And we are spiritual people. Again, those toddlers, very natural belief in God. Early scientists, the Galileos and such like, we're nearly all people of faith in different ways. So Christian theology contributed to the rise of science. We won't be talking about that on this course, but there are plenty of books out there. Peter Harrison is one who's talked about Christian theology contributing to the rise of science. You could see his talks and a number of others. If you go to the history section, I'm sure there's a history section on the Faraday website. You'll find those in the media section. And here's Johannes Kepler, one of those famous early scientists who said that our worship is all the more deep, the more clearly we recognize the creation and all its goodness. Indeed, how many songs did David sing? He received the ideas for his songs from the admiring observation of the skies. So Kepler was the one who was involved in looking at the orbits of the planets, among other things. And here's a more recent scientist, James Clerk Maxwell, who was did a lot of work in physics and was based in several universities, including Cambridge, who said, "Omnipotent God, who has created man in your image and has made him a living spirit so that he can seek and have power over your creatures. Teach us to study the work of your hands in such a way that we can subject the earth to our use and strengthen our reason in your service and receive your blessed word, so as to have faith in the one you have sent to give knowledge of salvation and the remission of our sins." Finally, scientists who are still alive and female, we do have them. Professor Christine Dunn at Durham University, who said that for me, the more we know about the vast yet intricate and beautiful universe we live in, the bigger and more awe-inspiring is the God who made it all. So, and here's some numbers for those of you who like numbers, looking at a couple of fairly old surveys, but I think these numbers would be fairly similar if you looked at them again as 10 years on. Belief in God in the UK, a God of some kind, about 72%, lower among UK-based biologists and physicists, but not nothing. We have some work to do to encourage those in our congregations that science and faith fit together, and encourage young people who like science to keep going. Yeah, there's some numbers about attending weekly services which reflect a similar set of numbers. So, but it's good to know these things, because we can feel sometimes as if science and faith should be at odds in some kind of way. Now, obviously, there is something going on there. It may be partly by the fact that, a lot of the UK-based biologists and physicists are actually from other countries, and they may have other dynamics to do with science and faith. But there is something for us to do to encourage people in science. So what I've been saying about scientists of faith, many of the early scientists in the scientific revolution, you might call it, had some kind of faith in God. Theology contributed to the rise of science. I'll give you one example, because I realize I didn't back that up with any examples. There's the idea that God had no constraints on how he created. So in order to understand his creation, we have to go out and look at that. And that goes against a certain kind of Greek philosophy, which said we should be able to understand mathematically, from mathematical sort of philosophical first principles, we should be able to predict how the world is, because those mathematical philosophical principles would constrain any kind of creating demiurge or whatever. So that was a bit of a revolution in thinking with the introduction that came from Christian theology, that now we think is obvious. You have to study the world to understand it, but that was quite new. Science enhances experience of faith, and many scientists are Christians today. Think a little bit about how we can engage with science in the church. So we're jumping the gun a little bit, because you'll hear all the different topics we can engage on later in the next 2 days, but I just want to give a sort of framework within which to be thinking about as you gather all that knowledge. So obviously the first way that as churches we can be engaging with science well is to be informed. I don't mean that we need to do, again, I think somebody may be unmuted. I'm not sure. If you can just have a little check that you're muted. We don't need to read all the books. There are too many. I have some of them here. I've read some of them, not all of them. We don't have a lot of time, but when we need to look things up, having done a course like this, there is the Faraday website. There are all the videos and audio. Obviously, you can have them on a podcast that you can download the audio, listen to them later. Picking out topics on the church resources page. Having your favorite sites where you can go and check things rather than listening to the pseudoscience, which we've all been exposed to recently. Another thing we can very easily do is revel in the wonders revealed by science. And as I said, I'll be demonstrating that in the worship time at the end of the course. But I've put the credits for these photos, which I think this one pretty sure is a kidney. And it's obviously something stellar. I think it's a, what do you call it when the star explodes? That thing, is it a nebula?
Nova.
Put the image credits very large here so you can see where I've got them from. Welcome Images is a lovely collection of biological images. Be a little bit careful as you search, because you can see some horrible medical images too, but beautiful cell biology type images. And NASA, just Google, and you're allowed to use any of their images free. It's very generous of them. We can also facilitate some exploring and questioning, and I realize that's difficult at the moment. Some people are more busy, some people are less busy at the moment. Maybe you have online groups running or the odd online talk. Maybe that's too much at the moment, but over time, giving people a chance to explore the areas of theology that inform our interaction with science. Like I just did in the question time, most of the answers to the debates on science and faith, some of it will be clarifying the science and being informed and being aware of what pseudoscience and what isn't. If you look at our social media thread this week for Faraday churches, there's a nice article that gives a little checklist to check, is this pseudoscience? One of them being, obviously, has it come from a reliable source? But there are some others. But a lot of the discussions are settled or moved forward in a helpful way by a good understanding of theology. And then, yes, as I said, there are areas of science that inform our theology. For many of us, it will be exploring areas we really didn't know anything about before that make us think, oh, we should have been engaging with that, or we aren't beating ourselves up. We should engage with that a bit as we go on. How can we do that? You know, we're going to hear about artificial intelligence. We're going to hear about creation care and some ethical issues, some things to do with creation evolution later on today. But these are giving people a chance to explore these, and not just the young people, which is often, you know, the people that a church leader will instinctively think we should serve in the area of science and faith because they're studying it at school. And we will hear from our youth and schools team later, but also the grown-ups. Come on, they don't get to explore this kind of stuff. They don't get to be in school RE lessons or whatever if they're taught effectively. We need to give them a chance. The other one that I've already mentioned is encouraging scientists, whether they're budding new scientists or whether they're you know, fully well on in their career, encouraging people. Like we would want to encourage people from all walks of life. We could include the scientists in there. And then there's caring for creation, either doing things specifically or influencing. Again, we may not have lots and lots of spare time to do this at the moment, but you know, going on, how can we do that? How can we use our voice to help people? Bioethics and AI are two topics we're going to think about later on, and the rest of creation, thinking about things like climate change or what have you. And then finally, this is the one that a lot of people will think about automatically when I think about science and faith. If you're from a more evangelical church or a church that's very good at engaging with the community and reaching out, thinking about building bridges. And I would encourage you to start with sharing this positive view of science and faith. It is tempting to pull people in with a catchy, very negative or debate sounding title, and that is appropriate from time to time, but sharing this view of science and faith that I have shared is a good one. And I've written an essay that explains it on the church's website, church's section of the Faraday website. I'll show you later. Discussing the big questions that are raised by science, things about beauty, creativity, can be quite a fun discussion. Where do you get your sense of purpose and meaning from? And that can be a dialogue. And then the thing that people tend to go to first, discussing issues and objections, which is important, but it's not everything we do. So, having heard that kind of framework for engagement, I think it would be good to spend about 10 minutes now, or 15 in fact we've got. We're going to put you into groups of 4, and we'd like you to discuss. I will put the question in the chat box now before you go into groups. Sorry, not good at multitasking. There we go. What are the resources and the opportunities if in your own church do you have scientists? If you don't, are you near an area of special natural beauty or special scientific interest even? Do you have, are you quite a well-off church that could do something quite fancy? Or do you have, people resources? What kind of opportunities do you have? Do you live near a science park, a school? What kind of resources and opportunities do you have near you? What ideas are sparking off? And I would encourage you to think beyond the current situation. So let's think 2 years in advance, back to back to a place where we have fewer restrictions. What could we do? So over to the slideshow. So the first, and I think the most important one, is Sundays, Sunday services, especially when the kids are in, but also for the adults. Often the kids do get a little bit of input, especially youth. It's the kind of thing youth leaders cover science, and if they learn from our youth team, they can do it well. But doing something on a Sunday, including something in your preach, or even better, if you're don't have a science background, get a scientist to preach. There are various resources. There's one here, there's a few on the website. I'll show you how to filter the resources so you can get hold of Sunday sermon, Sunday service ideas. This is my friend Emily. We went and ran a family service in a church, which was an immense amount of work, but it's always very rewarding. Getting the kids up doing experiments, and the adults will enjoy it too. Yeah, it means that everyone's exposed to it. You don't have to invent anything special. It's, you know, you were going to plan a Sunday service anyway. You could pull in a little bit of expertise, hopefully, if you have some sciencey types in your church. I've yet to go to church that doesn't have some kind of, you know, someone who's done a little bit of science or has a job that involves a little bit of science. You can pull them in. And the thing is, if you create a special interest group, people who are already interested will go, or who realize that they have a need. But everyone has a need to learn about this stuff. Outdoor worship, I think this will become more relevant in the spring. Some of us may have done it in the summer. And I'd encourage you to have a look at web resources online, rather than just moving your services outside and making them COVID safe, which is obviously really important. If you've got the space or the ability to do that, have a look at these resources. There are various, I've got a few pictures of books there, but, you know, just search online. There's loads. A lot of denominations have their own. This book, Outdoor Worship by Sarah and Sam Hargreaves, you can get a lot of that information for free on engageworship.com. And the reason I suggest looking at other resources is because people have often thought about how we can use being outside in order to do something that is meaningfully uses the surroundings, or joins in with the surroundings, I should say. I talked about all creation praising God, and if we can in some way join in with the worship of creation, or in different ways interact with and participate with what's happening outside already, I think could make those outdoor services even more meaningful. If you've got a churchyard, I know some people did some outdoor things in this, you know, or your local park. It's probably a bit more hassle, but I know a number of people have been doing it, and it could be very, very worthwhile. The other thing that you could do if you have a building project coming up is think about how you could celebrate creation in the structure of it. Now, these are obviously quite big budget projects. This was a window in a church in Zurich. I think it's the Grossmünster, and they'd use slices of geodes, of pieces, chunks of rock, this beautiful crystalline structure in this window that's not stained glass. I think that's incredible. It's quite famous for it. It has a whole load of windows like this. This St. Crispin's in Braunstone, someone actually phoned me up and said, can I send you a picture of our window, because we've just commissioned this window that uses a lot of scientific themes. You can see the little chromosomes there. It's a bit of fossil around about and all sorts of things. And then this is an old Victorian one that a landowner who was very into science and, you know, a Christian, wanted to put a lot of biological themes in this church. It's Sarah Losh, and it's a church in Ray. I've not managed to visit, but there's an incredible amount of imagery, animals, and it must be a very distracting place to worship. Don't do that, but very expensive as well, but quite an incredible idea. Okay, that's big budget, and none of us want to do big building projects, but, you know, just saying. But if you want to do something smaller, our church has a little exhibition space, and I organized the scientists in the church. I got them to email me high-res pictures from their work. So this one's from an engineer who did something concrete, someone who's studying bees in Nepal, you know, all sorts of things. This is someone's PhD, is a self-assembling tripartite molecule. And I got them printed out on canvases with a little bit of budget. You know, it cost us a couple £100, I think, and we stuck them on the walls. And they have a little explanation of how their work, this person's work, helped them to worship God. And it's there for everyone in the toddler group, you know, whoever comes into the building during the week to look at. So that was a bit more low-key than, brand new stained glass windows. The other thing you can do is hands-on science, and we'll be experiencing this later on. It's a bit of a fiddle, it's a bit messy, but it's so worth it. And grown-ups, I have to say, well, you tell me, I find that grown-ups tend to quite enjoy it. If it's thrust upon them, they might start out a bit shy, but it's not long before people dive in and say, oh, we never did this when I was at school, or oh, no one ever taught me science. Oh, I'd have done science if I realized it was this fun. And it's great. It's a great way to start the conversation. Some of you probably do messy church. You've probably all got messy church does science anyway, but anyway, the youth and schools team will tell you about that later. Someone was talking about a wonder day they had done in their church. But yeah, do hands-on science. It's worth the hassle. Youth and children, I don't need to say any more at this particular course. We've got, you'll hear more about that. I think it's tomorrow morning. As I said, this is something that often pops into people's minds. Oh, we should do something with the young people. But sometimes, there's quite a wide range of resources out there, and not all of them are as affirming of science as others. Not all of them, the science is accurate, but what our youth and schools team has done is try to produce materials that are approachable, they're cheap or free. A lot of them are online, pick up and go kinds of things. There's the SU Holiday Club Wonder Zone material that you can, affirm and encourage the young people in the church and give them a chance to explore those big questions. I find, you probably already know, kids ask such penetrating questions, same questions the adults will be asking, or better, just with different words. Small group studies are a great way to do this. I've had churches who have just said, right, all our small groups are doing test of faith material, which Keith mentioned at the beginning. Or you do eco church. Someone was saying it's tricky doing the teaching part, but there are, if you're trying to help your church to engage with the idea of creation care, there are small group resources you could, for Lent or whatever, we're all going to do. In our online core groups, we're going to do creation care, whatever. And there are various video resources and things. There's there's a filter on the website that I can show you where you can look at small group material. On creation care, there's a wealth. On other topics, there's less, and that's where I've been picking things out on our website. Plays. Now, you don't need to shell out for getting a theatre group, although one of the churches in Cambridge, I think, did get, did they get the God particle? That's very funny. Faraday showed the video of the God particle, and we had a panel discussion afterwards. I think most of these have been videoed. Most of them have been done by Riding Lights, who have had a very good track record of engaging with the science. Let Newton Be, I think the Faraday Institute commissioned. But there are a number of plays that engage from a faith perspective the science. So and it's just a way, once we're allowed to do events, that you could do something that's a bit fun, a bit different. The thing that people might much more naturally, invite people from the local community to come to. It's not a sort of, it's quite a low threshold invite people to come to an entertaining play. I haven't seen the Michael Faraday one yet. I'm quite intrigued. I gather it's touring the US at some point. Yeah. So I deliberately didn't mention lectures or talks because I know people don't need to be told how to put those on, but those are some ideas of things that you could do. What I want to do is I will stop sharing and I will put this question in the chat box so that you will have it when you go into groups. What could you do in your own church, having got to know each other in your groups, and it talked a little bit about the different opportunities. Some of you have been talking about challenges. What one thing will you do, I'll say in the next year, given the circumstances, give it a bit of time, what one thing, doesn't need to be massive, will you do to help your church engage with science? And I'll say for the grown-ups for now. Something that you can do, or you might have a range of ideas. So we'll go into our great breakout rooms for about 10 minutes and have a bit of a chat about that.
I think we should draw this session to a close. If we were in person, there would be a round of applause for Ruth. As read, thank you ever so much, Ruth, for that.